Welcome back to another episode of the H3X podcast, guys. I'm your host, Dave Miller, with my co-host Mark Goering in New York. I'm in Oklahoma City, and we just wanted to go back into a pretty important weekend for you, Mark, in New York. You guys just hosted one of the Covo immersions there in the Queens and Manhattan area, and I really just wanted to hear some of the lessons, what you learned, what you unpacked, what you guys experienced. Just kind of let us in on how the weekend went and why you held it, and what some lessons you learned.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So, guys, we did another immersion here, and some of our longtime listeners, you'll remember that last fall in Oklahoma City, Dave opened up his space, and we talk a lot on the podcast about habits and rhythms. And really, what that meant to have an immersion was Dave and other leaders in Oklahoma City opening up how they go about life through where they live, where they work, where they play, and we got to see it and join it. And we even were saying during that, the next one we got to do up here in New York City. And so this was that. This was our regular city to city rhythm that we want to do, of allowing people to experience all the stuff that we talk about and that we even read on the pages of the Bible. So I think the best way to sort of talk about what happened, Dave, we started with a vision cast, and I wasn't sure if it was going to click, but I'm going to do it for you all on Substack Live, and those that listen later, I'm going to try to describe it the best I can. But I had everybody circle up, and I said, okay, this is what this is. This is why we're together. And I had Jim, one of the leaders here, get up with me, and I said, okay, Jim, hold up your hand. And he did, and I held up my hand, and I said, okay, follow me. And I would move my hand, and he would follow with me wherever I would go, right? And I was like, oh, Jim, you're doing a great job. And he was just following my hand. And then I said, okay, Jim, now close your eyes. And he closed his eyes. And I was like, okay, follow me. And everybody starts laughing, right? Because Jim's hand is nowhere close to where my hand is at. And I'm like, okay, Jim, you can open your eyes. And then I made this statement: you cannot follow what you cannot see. And this is why we do immersions, because it's good to have training, it's good to have information, but you cannot follow what you cannot see. And so we just began to, from there, launch into, okay, that's what this is, and invite people into our life. And so we spent time at a coffee shop where we work regularly. I'm going to take my kids there even later today because they're off school, and I'll go over there and I'll do work, and I'm talking with the owner and the baristas there and the customers. And then we went to a park where a disciple who's come to faith in the last season, lives in this neighborhood, and we did the training in the park. We did a soccer camp at a park near another disciple who is engaging the families in a school that came to that soccer camp. We modeled what it looks like to do simple church in a home. We shared a meal together that everybody brought food for a potluck. We did the Lord's Supper together. So we literally did the stuff of disciple making that we do on a regular basis, but just with intentionality here in New York City.
What was your kind of goal? Because we've been talking about the differences between what an immersion looks like versus maybe an event training, where you're going to sit down with a group of people and really give them the pretty version, right? The clean, simple, trainable version that never actually happens in reality. It's just the thing that helps you kind of get started, but it gives you a framework. What's the difference between that style where we're going to do, an event training versus the immersion, and what's the goal differences that you had there with it?
Yeah, I was telling you, Dave, before we started this live here that I have a high value for event training. And by event training, I mean this is where we get in a classroom sort of setting, and it's not just informational, but it's actually practice. And people are getting up and they're practicing the tools with one another. They're putting in some reps so that they internalize them. And so it wasn't that we took the volume knob and turned that off. It was that we tried to keep that volume pretty high, where we still had, even in the park during this immersion, we had those training components that we went through, and we touched on some different tools, and then we went out and practiced them. It was that we turned the volume up on a bunch of other knobs. That was the difference, and tried to include not only doing that training, but allowing disciples to come to the coffee shop where we do that, ask questions, even meeting the owner, meeting some of the people that we talked with. And one of the things that's funny, the next morning, we had an abiding time where some leaders that came up from Houston, they led a time of abiding in the Word. And as we're reading the Bible, we had our Bibles open in the coffee shop. We had multiple customers come up to us and start talking to us. and ask questions and then even start to share some of their own story. And then somebody's breaking off to share the gospel with the guy. And so we're literally doing the stuff that we normally, when we do this kind of training, would be a module and then you tell a story about it. We're actually living it out. And so over the course of a few days, we built in a little bit of intentionality, but some of it was just opening up the rhythms that we already do locally for people who are joining to experience.
So what's one of the main differences about what your hope is for an immersion in terms of the result you're wanting, praying for versus what your result is you're looking for when you do an event training specifically?
I think there's a couple things. One of them being that we hope that people leave this with some of those light bulb moments in a greater way. And so people, when they come to a training that they might sign up for, they're on Zoom or they're in person, they'll get some tools and, oh, I'm going to go do this. But when you're in an immersion, what we have seen is there's some things you can't just pass on in a module that you experience when people are breaking bread together around the table because they brought some of the food to share and they're actually talking about what they've done, or they're experiencing the 3/3 uh, church process that we use in real time in by joining a simple church. um, and as that happens, there's some different ways that we actually can see ourselves taking that back and doing it. So that's one piece. The other piece is that we see collaboration, and even you've used this term, Dave, some emerging covenantal relationships, or those that are already that exist from those that are a part of this immersion. It's a vision cast for us to not just do this in a way where I get something and I take it back and apply it, but I actually begin to form collaboration as the church, city to city, in the process.
I know recently you just actually on Substack posted an article about the concept of withness, where you can't catch something that you don't see. So that when you started with Jim and you're using that illustration, trying to follow his hand and the things you just discussed, you actually kind of wrote a little bit of an article to unpack a little bit of that. Um, how is the how is your understanding of withness in an immersion and some of the things that you had as personal takeaways from that weekend, helping to solidify even more your understanding that seeing leads to doing in a way that you can't do otherwise?
Yeah, I we try to in our podcast, Dave, use the head, the heart, the hands, and I think that is what is emerging or shaping for me, is realizing that the idea of immersion or doing this with disciples, it I think it is effective, and so I like to talk about things that are working and how they're working, and we even are asking questions today around like, what have you seen? How have you seen that work? How is it different? And those things are important, but some of what I even unpacked in that article that is shaping for me is I think there's an important part of our head and our heart that comes from understanding this starts from this is who God is and how God works. That the God who is infinite and made all things chose to enter in to our human experience, even taking on this name of Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus is, where is it in the book of John? Maybe it's in First John. That which you have seen, that which you have heard, that's what you have touched with your hands. He
Right,
said
right.
onto you, and so he's literally talking about this idea of Jesus is not just spirit, but he is fully God, fully man, in a mysterious way, but he is also tying himself to a location and to a human form. And that, um, I think I in the past have just gone past that too quickly into like, okay, so how do we do this stuff? And that has begun to shape more and more, realizing, okay, Jesus, he was a model they could see, they could interact with him, they could talk with him, they could experience life with him. And this is God's plan. This is God's way that we want to live it out in following that same example. So that was one thing, Dave. I know that's off into a much deeper theological piece of it, but that's really become important to me to realize we can live out that same. We're not the Son of God, so we're not incarnational in the same way, but we can bring the example and we can show Jesus. There's the phrase I'm looking for. We can show Jesus in a way to people, and even show people how to show Jesus in a way that can help the light bulbs go off and for people to take that back and understand how to do that in their own spaces.
I think one of the pieces that I heard, even as you guys talked about, and you shared a lot of photos and some pictures and some updates while you guys were going through the immersion weekend. Super helpful inside of our little co-vocational multipliers group to just say, hey,
Yeah,
here's what we're doing, here's what we're seeing. So that even us, like I wasn't able to go for various reasons, but even us could participate in what you guys were seeing and understanding. And I think after Oklahoma City, after the New York immersion, both of us have realized the vulnerability that it creates whenever we're inviting people into our ministry
oh yeah,
because like you're literally saying come and see what I do, and so that means you're going to see more than just the highlights that I want you to see. We
that's right.
can't curate what you understand our lives and our ministries to be if you're coming and jumping in and we're basically just saying we're going to do what we're normally doing. We just want to have you come and hang out with us, and then we want to take a little time, or we can like come away with you and you can ask questions and we can debrief and we can show you and then help you understand this is where we are in context, this is what we're thinking and doing right now, this is why we're training what we're training, this is why these things aren't happening, here's the barriers that we have, here's the things we don't understand yet, right?
Yes,
Here's the relational issues that we're dealing with.
yeah,
And I know you even mentioned like whenever you guys went to the soccer park, it turned cold and it was windy and it was a terrible, like it just wasn't that fun to sit out there and do that. Um, with all that being said, our our desire to see collaboration become more covenantal than transactional has a lot to do with why we're inviting people into these immersions. Speak to it a little bit about what is it that we're wanting to model and what is it that we ourselves are needing and wanting among partners in the ministry that we're helping to kind of we're doing this to set an example and to open up a conversation about that idea of how covenantal relationships city to city works. Unpack that a little bit. What does that look like? What's that vision look like for you, and what are you wanting to see?
yeah. I will do that. It's funny because I think when before we hit record, Dave was the one who was actually talking about this, but I'll talk about it. So I think what we hoped people would do when they came was to join us in what we talk about so often on this podcast, our habits and our rhythms. But for them to be able to do that, for people that are from Brooklyn, from Manhattan and the Bronx, people that came within the city, and then people who are coming from outside the city, for them to be able to join us in habits and rhythms, we have to have habits and rhythms happening here. And those core pieces at the very center where we have rhythms of we go to these places, right? We have habits of when I go to these places, I'm going to be sharing the gospel. I'm going to be reading my Bible. I'm going to be praying and doing these things. Those pieces form because there's people that begin to mutually submit. I'm going to do this together here in the city. And then other people are joining in with that, not in a way of saying, I'm going to come to this training, learn this stuff, and then go apply it. Although there's a component of that, but more so, they're going to join in to what's already happening and be invited to the level of closeness that they want to join in with that. But they get to see the way that people at the core are living that out and are mutually submitting to do that in our space. And so that's where that collaboration piece comes that you're talking about, Dave. People that are doing it together, inviting other people to join in and see that, learn from even there was multiple points you hit on this during this immersion where it's like, all right, guys, well, that plan didn't go super well, and we thought it would be like this. It's not working. What do you think? Like, help us right now. And or we had a potluck and um, we had like about enough food for 5 people and there was 25, 30 people in the room. And so people are like, well, what are we going to do? And I'm like, well, what are we going to do? What are you going to do, man? And so people ran up the street and they're buying food and helping to make it work. And so I think there was this element that happened when it wasn't a transactional event that I get something out of, but something that was more covenantal in the way we're collaborating that was a model and then reproduced through the process.
Yeah, I um I really was hesitant from the Oklahoma City side, and you know this because you said, "Hey, Dave's the one that talked about this before you asked the question." Yeah, well, you're the one that pushed me into Oklahoma City, being something we did in an immersion, and you had made mention through another conversation that we were having the way in which relationships in the center, like the core of what you're trying to create DNA wise, the closer that you get to that center, the more there's a gravitational pull. And as people start to get closer to the center, the more salty they become, um, about the ideas, and the more they begin to bring other people in. And it just kind of creates this chain reaction, if you will, relationally, to
Yeah.
where that gravity, relationally connected, starts to just kind of pull layer after layer, just keeps pulling people closer
Yeah.
and closer and closer and closer. And here in Oklahoma City, while you were doing the immersion, we actually were having a Fifth Sunday gathering. Actually, it was a different weekend. That's all right. My weeks all run together. But the point being is, we had a young man who spoke, who really just, the word of God just came out of him. And we began to really see a lot of people look to him as a leader and recognize who he was and what he was doing. And we watched live as what came out of his life drew people closer to the center,
Yeah.
right? And what we were doing. And I think the immersion idea is we're wanting other people to be able to experience what we're experiencing in our own networks.
Yeah.
But we don't want to do it in a way that is, I'll use the word curated again, that is perfected, that is planned, that is rehearsed, that's exactly the way that it is. And I think that's a little odd that what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we do want you to come in and we do want you to see not only our successes but our mistakes, which then allows you to kind of see the relationships that we have and get inspired to say, we want to have that done, but we want to do it not by ourselves, but we're now a part of what you're doing as well. And it just kind of continues to bring people in, because the transactional side of things just isn't getting the job done.
Yeah.
But the covenant side of things is where I have found, and you have found over the years, that the guys who and the ladies who stay in it for the long term, what keeps them in it ends up being the relational connections more
Yeah.
than the tools and the training. It's the relational connections that keep them in there. And I think you and I understand the value of it personally. And so we're just wanting to invite more people in to say, hey, you need each other to just
Yeah.
stick it out.
I think some of it, just in terms of just now taking a big picture view as we're kind of debriefing how that went on the other side of a couple of those now, Dave, is that I think what we're doing really is adding a couple of other success metrics. So it's not that we're saying, oh, well, we're not going to do this other piece anymore. It's like we're going to add another couple of saying, it's the head, heart, and hands. That's even the name of our podcast. It's like I think it's so useful to have the hands piece where we are looking for the doers who are asking the how questions. Sometimes we've said in the past, Dave, we're looking for those who are saying like, how do I do this? And in that process of that training, they're getting handholds, and then we can identify leaders. All that stuff. I'm still thinking of that as a definition of success. I'm still looking for that, but I'm realizing that for that seed to have what it needs to really transfer and get planted, there's a couple of other things that have been really helpful where it is it sometimes is there's a collaboration piece that is emerging, like, oh, that's a definition of success in here too, of how we're working together to do this. And for people to experience it in an imperfect way and then debrief it. Jesus did that in Luke 8, 9, 10. He models it. 8, 9, he sends them out, and then 10, he's having them do it and come back and debrief it. And when we begin to add some of those other pieces to the process in a life on life way, I've just seen it stick better, and I've seen it actually the transfer happen a lot more cleanly.
So, how would you describe the city to city idea, um, as people interact with each other? Um, in general terms, what does a city to city relationship look like? How is now New York going to interact with Rochester and Houston differently? And how is Houston and, let's say, Rochester, in your hope and them interacting with New York? What does that look like? What does that relationship want to become? And how does it facilitate in a way that's beneficial for everybody?
Well, I think the biggest thing, Dave, and then I want your thoughts on this, but is skin in the game. So we're not relating organizationally. but relating as church with our values expressed: time, money, energy. And so just this last week, those folks that came, they put in time, they put in money. We didn't pay for their plane ticket to get up here. No organization's paying for that. They put in energy to show up and be a part of this. And then as they go back, they're taking some pieces back. And then immediately there was one of the churches here locally said, we're going to take a trip up to Rochester now and sit in your living room and do this with you to learn from how you're doing this. So I think that's the biggest piece, is skin in the game of time, money, energy, that happens city to city, where that sort of, you talked about the idea of covenantal relationships, that and maybe you can unpack more clarity what that means. But to me, that's a I've got skin in the game. We are, on, at least to some degree, we've got uh, DNA alignment that matters, and to the degree that it matters. And then I am going to invest in doing stuff with you in a way that costs me something, um, and may not benefit me. But but it might not. But I'm gonna invest in a way that I've got skin in the game. What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Yeah, I think that the concept is a little bit hard sometimes to get because you may not have seen it. And I don't think that it's something that we could actually explain. I've got an article on Substack called Teaming for Centergy, Sentergy, that helps to kind of explain how relationship and task have to be in tandem with each other. They have to be in tension and have to be used together in order to hold a balance and to really live in that radical middle. And then that drives us towards what, Guy and Lee and those guys have really pushed our direction, that start, strengthen, sustain kind of understanding of how a movement grows and where it goes. But understanding that cooperation, collaboration, and covenant is an inward gravity as people start to build stronger relationships, and
Yep.
that happens as we do the work together and tasks. And we use the concentric circles of the four fields to kind of talk about what that looks like in terms of teaming circles. But the mechanics of it, I think, Mark, are, well, easy to diagram. But to your point that we started the entire podcast out with, I got to put my hand up and they've got to see it. Like, we can't, if I haven't seen it,
Yeah.
um, I won't understand it. And the city to city dynamic and relationship, and what does it require of me? What does
Yep.
it what does it not require of me? What's expected? What's not expected? Where does my heart's allegiance lie? Where do I spend most of my time? Like, those relational dynamics are just something that have to be worked out in actual real relationships, people to people, who actually spend time together and spend time developing a relationship and then figuring out what the boundaries and the dynamics and the understandings of that relationship is for mutual benefit, to be mutually beneficial. And so I my answer is really vague because I think it's just, we want to open up our immersions in order to live it and let people see it, so that we can start to figure out how we don't have to use each other, but we can live in partnership and collaboration with each other to move the kingdom forward and break barriers and love one another well.
Yeah. So we started the immersion, Dave, with that illustration, and I had Jim, one of the leaders, get up and do that with me. With, he could see, and then he closed his eyes and opened his eyes. We said, "You cannot follow what you cannot see." We ended the immersion with another one. So I had him get up and said, "Okay, so now try to follow me." And then I started to move really fast, and it was hard for him to keep up with it. And then I said, "Okay, give me your hand again." And he went like this. And then we started to move together. And so we ended the immersion with our hands were connected, where I was grabbing his hand and then moving his hand with my hand. And then the phrase is, "It's easier to do it with somebody." And so you can't follow what you can't see, and it's easier to do it with somebody. And I think that's the way I think I'm seeing this idea of immersion in the ministry of Jesus. The infinite God, he ties himself to humanity in a way that he's limited, but in that process, he transfers his life in a model they can reproduce to 12 who do it with others. And that's what I want to do. I want to follow that same model and do the same thing.
Appreciate you letting us jump into the weekend, give us a little debrief. For all you guys who may see this or listen to it, that hopped into the immersion. We hope it blessed you. And Mark, thanks for just opening up you and Jim's lives and your ministries to set the example and to let us just kind of peer in, learn from, and relationally just continue to connect.
Yep. Well, thank you, Dave. Thank you, guys. And as always, we've got a way that you can join us tribe-wise. We'll put this in the link below for how you can jump in with the WhatsApp with us. We call it Covo Multipliers. And we've got a crew of guys that we're talking out this stuff and literally doing it together. So come join us, and we'll see you guys next time.